The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but Dr. Lisa Morgan didn't notice. She sat hunched over her computer screen at the Arecibo Observatory, her eyes burning from staring at radio wave patterns that danced across her monitor like electronic ghosts. It was 3 in the morning, and the only sounds in the control room were the quiet hum of computers and the distant chirping of insects outside in the Puerto Rican jungle. Lisa had been working the night shift for 6 months now. Most people thought studying radio signals from space was boring work, but she loved it. Every night, she listened to the universe speak in languages of mathematics and physics. Pulsars spun their regular beats like cosmic lighthouses, gas clouds, sang in frequencies that told stories of stellar birth and death. And sometimes, just sometimes, something truly amazing would appear in the data. Tonight felt different. Something in the patterns made her lean closer to the screen. The signal first caught her attention around midnight. It was weak, barely stronger than the background noise of the universe, but it had something that made it special. It repeated every 47 minutes and 12 seconds. Exactly. Not approximately. Exactly. Natural objects in space were never that precise. Lisa grabbed her phone and called Dr. Alan Brooks, her research partner, who lived 20 minutes away. Alan answered on the 5th ring, his voice thick with sleep. "This better be good, Lisa. I was having a wonderful dream about fishing." "Alan, you need to get down here. I think I found something." "Define something. Are we talking about a new pulsar? Or did little green men finally phone home?" Lisa looked at her screen again. Signal was still there, steady and patient-like. It had been waiting centuries for someone to notice it. "I honestly don't know, but it's artificial. I'm sure of it." 30 minutes later, Alan walked into the control room, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing a jacket over his pajamas. He was 10 years older than Lisa, with gray hair and thick glasses that made him look like the stereotype of a mad scientist. But his mind was sharp, and he had been studying radio astronomy for 25 years. "Show me what you've got," he said, handing Lisa one of the cups. Lisa pulled up the data on the main screen. The signal appeared as a series of peaks and valleys, rising and falling in complex patterns that looked almost like music written in mathematics. Alan studied the display for several minutes, his expression growing more serious with each passing moment. He asked Lisa to replay the signal from different time periods. Each time, the pattern was identical, not similar, identical. "The periodicity is too perfect," Alan muttered, adjusting his glasses. "Natural pulsars drift over time. There. Rotation slows down, even if it's just by tiny amounts. This thing has been beating the same rhythm for as long as we've been recording it." "How long is that?" Lisa asked. Alan checked the computer logs. "Our automated systems have been catching glimpses of this signal for 3 years. We just never noticed it before because it's so weak and the computers flagged it as interference." They spent the next 2 hours analyzing the signal from every angle they could think of. They checked for patterns within patterns, looked for mathematical relationships, and searched for any sign of natural origin. Everything pointed to the same conclusion: someone or something had created this signal on purpose. As dawn began to creep over the mountains of Puerto Rico, Alan leaned back in his chair and rubbed his tired eyes. "Lisa, I think we need to call the director, and probably the National Science Foundation, and maybe the Pentagon. You really think it's that important?" "I think," Alan said slowly, "that we might be looking at the first confirmed signal from an intelligent alien civilization." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Scientists from around the world flew to Puerto Rico to examine the signal. Government officials asked endless questions. The media tried to get information, but the research team kept everything secret while they worked to decode the message. The breakthrough came when Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a mathematician from MIT, noticed that parts of the signal matched prime number sequences. Once they had that key, other patterns began to make sense. The signal contained basic mathematical concepts that any intelligent species would understand. The value of pi, the golden ratio, simple geometric relationships. But there was more, much more. Hidden within the mathematical framework was information. That made Lisa's heart race. Star charts, showing the position of nearby galaxies, chemical formulas for elements that existed throughout the universe, and most incredibly, what appeared to be technical blueprints for technologies that humans had never seen before. It's like a cosmic textbook, Lisa explained to Alan one evening as they worked late in the lab. Whoever sent this wanted to prove they were intelligent and they wanted to share their knowledge. But why? Alan asked. Why broadcast all this information into space? The answer came 3 days later when Lisa finally decoded the emotional core of the message. Buried beneath layers of mathematics and science was something that transcended species and language, a cry for help. The beings who sent the signal called themselves the Xanthari. Their home world was dying. Environmental disasters had poisoned their air and water. Their population was shrinking. They had perhaps a few hundred years left before their civilization disappeared forever, but the Xanthari had not given up hope. They had built powerful transmitters and aimed them at stars that might have planets capable of supporting life. For over 200 years, they had been broadcasting their knowledge and their location, hoping that somewhere in the galaxy, someone would hear their call and have the technology to help them. The most shocking part was the timestamp embedded in the signal. The Xanthari had started transmitting their message in the year 1823, according to Earth's calendar. That was decades before humans had even invented radio technology. The Xanthari had faith that someday someone would develop the ability to hear them. Lisa sat in the observatory at 3 in the morning, just like on the night she first found the signal. But now everything was different. She wasn't just listening to the universe anymore. She was listening to people. Alien people. But people nonetheless. People who were scared and desperate and hoping for a miracle. The signal was still there, still repeating its patient message every 47 minutes and 12 seconds. But now Lisa understood what it was really saying. We are here. We are dying. Please, if anyone can hear this, please help us. Alan walked into the control room carrying 2 cups of coffee, just like he had on that first night. Can't sleep either? He asked. I keep thinking about them, Lisa said. The Xanthari. They've been calling for help for 200 years. Desperate must they be. How brave must they be to keep trying for so long? The question now, Alan said, settling into the chair beside her, is what do we do about it? Lisa looked at the screen showing the location of the Xanthari homeworld. It was 127 light-years away in the constellation Draco. With current human technology, it would take thousands of years to reach them. By then, the Xanthari would be long extinct. But the signal contained more than just a cry for help. It contained scientific knowledge that human scientists were only beginning to understand, theories about faster-than-light travel, designs for engines that could bend space and time. The Xanthari had given humanity the keys to the stars. We have to try, Lisa said finally. We have to find a way to answer their call. Outside the observatory, the sun was rising over Puerto Rico, but Lisa Morgan was no longer thinking about her small island home. She was thinking about a dying world 127 light-years away, where an alien civilization waited in the darkness, still hoping that someone, somewhere, would hear their desperate message and come to help. The age of human space. Exploration was about to begin. The news leaked 3 days after the scientific community confirmed the alien signal was real. Someone at the National Science Foundation talked to a reporter, and within hours, every television station and newspaper in the world was running. The same headline: Scientists confirm alien distress signal from dying planet. Helen Carter, the administrator of NASA, watched the chaos unfold from her office in Washington, D.C. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing for 6 hours. World leaders, military officials, and reporters all wanted answers to the same questions. What did the aliens want? Were they dangerous? What was humanity going to do about it? Helen already knew what she wanted to do. She had read Dr. Morgan's reports and studied the decoded Xanthari message. These weren't invaders or conquerors, or people facing extinction who had reached out across the galaxy for help. And somehow, miraculously, their message had found the one species that might be able to answer their call. The problem was that most politicians didn't see it that way. Absolutely not. Senator Richard Hayes said during an emergency meeting of the Senate Science Committee. "We don't know anything about these creatures. They could be lying. This could be a trap," Senator Helen replied calmly. "They've been transmitting this signal for over 200 years. It's longer than the United States has existed as a nation. If this is a trap, it's the most patient one in history." The debates went on for weeks. Some countries wanted to ignore the signal completely. Others wanted to study it, but do nothing else. A few suggested sending a simple radio response to let the aliens know they had been heard. But Helen Carter had a different idea. She had been studying the technical information hidden in the Xanthari signal. She believed it contained something incredible, the theoretical framework for faster-than-light travel. She called a private meeting with the world's leading physicists and engineers. Dr. Sarah Kim from Seoul National University flew in to examine the alien propulsion theories. Professor Hans Mueller from the European Space Agency brought his team of rocket engineers. Dr. Raj Patel, who had spent 20 years designing experimental engines, arrived from Mumbai with briefcases full of calculations. They gathered in a secure conference room at NASA headquarters, where Helen spread out printouts of the Xanthari technical diagrams across a long table. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "I believe these aliens have given us the keys to the stars." Dr. Kim was the first to speak up. "Helen, these equations are incredible, but they're also incredibly complex. Even if the theory is sound, we're talking about technology that's decades ahead of anything we can build." "How many decades?" Helen asked. Professor Mueller studied the diagrams more closely, with unlimited funding and international cooperation. "Maybe 10 years? Maybe 15? "The Xanthari don't have 15 years, Helen said. "According to their message, their planet will be uninhabitable within a few centuries. And that message is already over 200 years old." Dr. Patel looked up from his calculations. "What exactly are you proposing, Helen?" "I'm proposing that we build a ship, a real interstellar ship capable of reaching the Xanthari homeworld. And I'm proposing that we send a crew to help them." The room fell silent. The scientists looked at each other with expressions that mixed excitement with terror. What Helen was suggesting had never been attempted before. Humans had never traveled beyond their own solar system. They had barely managed to land on Mars. But the more they studied the Xanthari technology, the more possible it seemed. The aliens had included detailed instructions for building what they called a fusion pulse drive. It worked by creating controlled nuclear explosions behind a spacecraft, pushing it forward at tremendous speeds. The theory suggested such a ship could reach 15% of light speed, even at that incredible velocity. The journey to the Xanthari system would take over 30 years. But it was possible. Difficult, dangerous, and expensive beyond imagination. But possible news of the secret NASA project leaked within a month. The reaction from around the world was immediate and intense. Protesters gathered outside space agencies demanding that governments focus on problems at home instead of spending money on aliens. Other groups organized counter-protests, arguing that helping the Xanthari was a moral obligation that would unite humanity like nothing before. Religious leaders debated whether the aliens had souls. Military officials worried about giving advanced technology to potential enemies. Scientists argued that the knowledge gained from such a mission would benefit all of humanity. In the middle of all this chaos, Captain Jake Morrison walked into Helen Carter's office and volunteered for the mission. Jake was 42 years old, former Air Force pilot who had commanded 3 shuttle missions to the International Space Station. He was known for staying calm under pressure and making smart decisions when things went wrong. He also had a reputation for taking risks that other people thought were crazy. "You understand what you're volunteering for?" Helen asked him. "Isn't a 6-month mission to Mars? You'd be gone for decades. You might never come back to Earth." Jake nodded. "I've read the reports. I understand the risks. But I also understand what's at stake. There's an entire civilization out there that's counting on someone to help them. If we don't try, who will?" Finding. The rest of the crew took 6 months. Thousands of people applied, but the requirements were strict. The crew members had to be experts in their fields, physically and mentally healthy, and willing to spend most of their adult lives traveling through space. Dr. Nina Walsh, a brilliant scientist who specialized in alien biology and chemistry, became the mission's chief science officer. She had spent her career studying the possibility of life on other planets. The chance to actually meet aliens was a dream come true. Carlos Rivera, an engineer who had designed life support systems for long-duration space missions, volunteered as the ship's technical officer. He was known for his ability to fix anything with whatever tools were available. Dr. Ben Taylor, medical doctor who had studied the effects of space travel on the human body, signed up as the mission's medical officer. He would be responsible for keeping the crew healthy during the long journey. Amy Johnson, a communications expert who had worked on deep space radio projects, became the mission's communications officer. Her job would be to maintain contact with Earth, and eventually establish communication with the Zenthari, while the crew prepared for their mission. Engineers and scientists from 12 countries worked together to build the ship. They called it the USS Pioneer. It was unlike anything humanity had ever constructed. The Pioneer was over 1 kilometer long, with most of its length devoted to fuel storage and the massive fusion engines. The crew section was much smaller, designed to support 5 people for decades. It had everything they would need: sleeping quarters, a medical bay, laboratories, workshops, and enough food and supplies to last the entire journey. The most impressive part of the ship was its engine system. The fusion pulse drive used controlled nuclear explosions to push the ship forward, each blast adding a tiny bit more speed. Over months and years, those tiny increases would add up to velocities that no human spacecraft had ever achieved. Building. The Pioneer cost more money than most countries spent on their entire space programs. But something amazing happened as the project continued. Nations that had been enemies began working together. Russian engineers shared designs with American scientists. Chinese manufacturers worked alongside European technicians. For the first time in history, humanity was truly cooperating on a single goal. The launch was scheduled for December 15th, exactly 2 years after Dr. Morgan first detected the alien signal. As the date approached, people around the world watched the news with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The Pioneer represented the biggest gamble in human history. 3 days before launch, Jake Morrison stood in the observation deck of the space station where the Pioneer waited. The ship looked strange and beautiful against the star-filled darkness of space. In a few days, he and his crew would climb aboard and begin a journey that would take them farther from home than any human had ever traveled. Amy Johnson joined him at the window. "Having second thoughts?" she asked. Jake shook his head. "I keep thinking about the Zenthari signal. They've been calling for help for over 200 years. Someone needs to answer. What if we can't help them? What if we get there and find out we're too late?" "Then at least we tried," Jake said. "At least they'll know that someone heard their call and cared enough to make the journey." On launch day, over 1 billion people around the world watched as the USS Pioneer fired its engines and began its long journey to the stars. As the ship disappeared into the darkness of deep space, humanity held its breath and waited to see if their first interstellar mission would succeed. The age of human space exploration had truly begun. 5 years into their journey, Captain Jake Morrison floated in the observation deck of the USS Pioneer, watching the stars slowly drift past. The ship was moving so fast that nearby stars showed a slight blue shift in their light, but space was so vast that the view barely seemed to change from day to day. The crew had settled into a routine that would carry them through the decades ahead. Each person had their duties and responsibilities, but they also had to find ways to stay sane during the longest journey any human had ever attempted. Jake spent his mornings reviewing ship systems and checking their course. The Pioneer was performing better than anyone had hoped. The fusion engines fired perfectly every few hours, adding tiny amounts of speed that would eventually carry them to 15% of light speed. Their life support systems recycled air and water so efficiently that they were actually using less resources than planned. But the technical success of the SCP mission couldn't solve the psychological challenges of traveling through empty space. For decades, Dr. Nina Walsh had thrown herself into studying the Zenthari data with an intensity that sometimes worried her crewmates. She had learned to read their mathematical language and was beginning to understand their culture. The Zenthari seemed to be a peaceful species that valued knowledge above everything else. They had never fought wars like humans did. Instead, they had spent thousands of years learning about the universe and sharing information with each other. "They're fascinating," Nina told Jake during one of their weekly crew meetings. Their entire civilization was built around cooperation and learning. They solved problems by working together, not by fighting. "What about their environmental crisis?" asked Dr. Ben Taylor, the mission's medical officer. "How did a peaceful species manage to destroy their own planet?" Nina pulled up a display showing Zenthari historical data. It wasn't intentional. They developed industrial technology very quickly, faster than they understood its long-term effects. By the time they realized what was happening, the damage was too severe to reverse with their current technology. Carlos Rivera, the ship's engineer, looked up from his tablet where he was monitoring engine performance. "That's why they're reaching out for help. They need someone with different knowledge and different technology." Amy Johnson nodded from her communication station. "I've been analyzing their latest transmissions. Signal is getting weaker, which probably means their power systems are failing. But they're still broadcasting. They haven't given up." The crew's dedication to the mission helped carry them through the difficult early years of the journey. But as time passed, the challenges grew more complex. 8 years into the mission, Jake had to deal with the first serious crisis. Carlos had been working on repairs to one of the water recycling systems when a pipe joint failed under pressure. Superheated water sprayed across the engineering section. Carlos was badly burned on his arms and chest. Ben Taylor worked for hours, treating Carlos's injuries while Jake and Nina tried to repair the damaged systems. Without working water recycling, the crew would run out of drinking water in less than a month. "I can fix it," Carlos said through gritted teeth as Ben changed his bandages. "It's going to hurt, but I can fix it. You're not going anywhere near those pipes until you heal," Ben replied firmly. "Then we all die of thirst," Carlos said. "I'm the only one who really understands that system." Jake made the decision to let Carlos direct the repairs while Nina and Amy did the physical work. It took 3 days of careful, dangerous work in the flooded engineering section, but they managed to get the water systems working again. The incident reminded everyone how fragile their situation was. They were millions of miles from Earth, with no possibility of rescue if something went seriously wrong. They had to solve every problem themselves, using only what they had brought with them. As the years passed, the crew adapted to their isolated life in ways that surprised them. Jake discovered he enjoyed growing vegetables in the ship's small garden. The tiny green plants reminded him of Earth and gave him hope that life could flourish anywhere. Even in the metal corridors of a spacecraft, Nina became obsessed with learning the Zenthari language. She spent hours each day listening to their transmissions and trying to decode their words and concepts. Slowly, she began to understand not just what they were saying, but how they thought about the world. Carlos turned the ship's workshop into an amazing collection of tools and spare parts. He could build almost anything the crew needed using recycled materials and clever engineering. His burns healed, but he kept the scars as a reminder of how dangerous their journey was. Ben studied the long-term effects of space travel on human health. The crew exercised for hours each day to keep their bones and muscles strong in the ship's artificial gravity. He monitored their psychological health as carefully as their physical condition, knowing that mental problems could be just as dangerous. As equipment failures, Amy maintained their connection to Earth and managed the ship's computer systems. As the years passed, the time delay for messages to reach Earth grew longer and longer. By year 10, it took over 3 years for a message to travel between the Pioneer and home. The growing isolation was hardest on Amy. She had always been a social person who enjoyed talking to friends and family. Now her only companions were for other people she saw every day, and her family on Earth were aging and changing in ways she could only imagine. 15 years into the journey, they received troubling news from Earth. Political tensions had increased, as some countries blamed others for the enormous cost of the Pioneer mission. Several nations had pulled out of the international space cooperation agreements. Some politicians were calling the mission a waste of money that should have been spent on problems at home. They're starting to forget why we're out here, Amy said sadly as she read the latest messages from Earth. People always forget, Jake replied. But that doesn't change what we're doing. The Xanthari are still out there waiting for help. The crew's determination was tested again in year 18 when they encountered a massive radiation storm from a nearby star. The ship's shielding protected them from the worst effects, but several important computer systems were damaged by the intense radiation. For 3 weeks, Carlos and Nina worked around the clock to repair the damaged electronics. They had to rebuild entire circuit boards using spare parts and materials from other systems. Jake watched nervously as their navigation. Computers flickered in and out of operation. If we lose navigation, we'll drift past the Xanthari system and never find our way back, he told Ben during one of their private conversations. We won't lose it, Ben said confidently. Carlos and Nina are the best engineers in the solar system. If anyone can fix this, they can. Ben was right. Repairs took almost a month, but the ship's systems came back online stronger than before. Carlos had actually improved several designs while rebuilding them. By year 20, the crew had become like a close family. They knew each other's habits, fears, and dreams better than anyone else in the universe. They celebrated birthdays and holidays together. They shared stories about their lives on Earth and their hopes for the future. They also continued to monitor the Xanthari signals, which had grown weaker but never stopped. Nina had become fluent in the alien language and was able to understand more complex messages. The news from the Xanthari homeworld was not good. Their population continued to decline, and their environmental problems were getting worse, but there was also hope in the alien messages. The Xanthari had detected the Pioneer's engine signatures and realized that someone was actually coming to help them. After more than 2 centuries of calling into the darkness, they finally had proof that someone had heard them. They're excited, Nina told the crew during a briefing in year 22. They can't believe that anyone would travel so far to help them. They keep asking if we're really coming. What do you tell them? Jake asked. I tell them we're humans, Nina said with a smile. And humans always answer the call. As the Pioneer continued its long journey through the star-filled darkness, the crew prepared for the most important mission in human history. They were no longer just explorers or scientists, they were ambassadors for their entire species, carrying humanity's first message to the stars. We heard you calling, and we came to help. After 31 years of traveling through the darkness between stars, the USS Pioneer finally began to slow down as it approached the Xanthari system. Captain Jake Morrison, now 53 years old, with gray hair and lines around his eyes, stood in the observation deck watching an alien sun grow larger each day. The star was smaller and redder than Earth's sun. It had 3 planets orbiting around it. The Xanthari homeworld was the middle planet covered in thick clouds that glowed with an unhealthy orange color. Even from millions of miles away, crew could see that something was terribly wrong. Dr. Nina Walsh had spent the last year preparing for first contact. She had mastered the Xanthari language and studied their culture until she felt like she understood how they thought. But seeing their dying world made her heart sink. The atmospheric readings are worse than we expected, she told Jake as they reviewed the data from their sensors. The air is full of toxic gases and ash from volcanic activity. The planet's temperature has risen by almost 10 degrees in the last century. Carlos Rivera worked frantically to prepare the landing shuttle, while Dr. Ben Taylor checked and rechecked the environmental suits they would need to survive on the surface. Amy Johnson managed communications with both Earth and the Xanthari. Though messages to Earth now took over 15 years to arrive, the Xanthari response to their arrival was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours of the Pioneer entering their system, dozens of radio signals flooded their communications equipment. The aliens were broadcasting on every frequency they could manage, sending messages of welcome, gratitude, and desperate hope. Nina translated the messages as they came in. They're saying things like, the star travelers have come, and salvation arrives from the void. Jake, they've been waiting for us for over 200 years. We're like a miracle to them. No pressure, Jake muttered, but he was smiling. 3 decades of wondering if they would find anyone alive when they arrived. It was relief to know the Xanthari had survived. The first challenge was finding a safe place to land. The planet's surface was covered with storms and volcanic ash. Most of the oceans had dried up or become poisonous. The Xanthari had retreated into underground cities, built deep beneath the surface, where they could filter the air and protect themselves from the toxic environment. Following Xanthari guidance, Jake piloted their landing shuttle toward coordinates. Near the planet's north pole, the shuttle bucked and shook as it descended through the poisonous atmosphere. Outside the windows, they could see a landscape that looked like a vision of hell. The sky was orange and black with swirling clouds of ash. The ground was cracked and barren, broken by rivers of lava that glowed red in the dim light. "This planet is dying," Ben said quietly as they flew over the devastated surface. "That's why we're here," Jake replied. They landed near a metal structure that rose from the ground like a silver tower. It was an entrance to one of the underground cities, built to withstand the harsh conditions on the surface. As soon as their shuttle touched down, figures in environmental suits emerged from the structure and began walking toward them. Jake's hand shook slightly as he sealed his helmet and checked his air supply. In a few minutes, he would become the first human being to meet an alien face to face. The weight of representing his entire species felt heavy on his shoulders. The airlock cycled, and Jake stepped onto the surface of an alien world. The gravity was lighter than Earth's, making him feel like he could jump twice as high. The ground beneath his feet was covered with fine gray ash that crunched like snow with each step. 3 Xanthari approached them slowly, moving with careful, graceful steps. They were smaller than humans, about 4.5 feet tall, with long, thin arms and legs that seemed perfectly adapted for their lower gravity. Their environmental suits were made of a shimmering material that reflected the orange light of their dying sky. The lead Xanthari stopped a few feet away and began speaking in their musical language. Nina stepped forward and replied in careful Xanthari words she had practiced for years. "Greetings, travelers from the distant star. I am Veltarn, leader of the northern city. We welcome you to our world, though we are ashamed you must see it in such condition." Nina translated for the crew, then replied, "We are humans from the planet Earth. We received your signal and have come to help. I am Nina, and this is Jake, our leader." Even through their environmental suits, Jake could see the Xanthari leaders. "Surprise, you learned our language. Came all this way because of our signal?" "We've been traveling for over 30 years, Nina replied. "Your message reached us 127 years ago, but it took us this long to develop the technology to answer your call." The emotional weight of that statement seemed to overwhelm Veltarn. The alien leader stood silently for a long moment before speaking again. 30 years. You spent 30 years of your lives to help people you had never met. That's what people do, Jake said through Nina's translation. When someone calls for help, you answer. The Xanthari led them through the airlock and into their underground city. Jake had expected something primitive, but what he found was beautiful and advanced. The tunnels were carved from solid rock and lined with panels that gave off soft, warm light. Gardens filled with alien plants grew along the walkways, fed by artificial sunlight and carefully recycled water. Thousands of Xanthari had gathered to see the human visitors. They were a graceful people with large eyes adapted to the dim light of their underground world. Their skin had a slight blue tint, and they moved with a fluid motion that reminded Jake of dancers. But despite the beauty of their city, Jake could see signs of their desperate situation everywhere. Many of the Xanthari looked thin and tired. Some of the tunnels were sealed off with signs that Nina translated as warnings about air contamination. The population was clearly much smaller than the city had been designed to support. Vel turned lead them to a large chamber where other Xanthari leaders waited. Among them was Queen Ara, their chief scientist, who had been working on solutions to their environmental crisis for decades. "We have tried everything we can think of," Quinyara explained, through Nina's translation. "We built machines to clean the air, but they cannot work fast enough. We tried to move our entire population underground, but our life support systems are failing. We estimate we have perhaps 50 years before our civilization ends completely." Humans spent hours learning about the Xanthari situation. The aliens had made the same mistakes that humans had almost made on Earth. Their industrial revolution had happened too quickly, and by the time they understood the environmental consequences, It was too late to reverse the damage with their existing technology, but the humans had faced similar challenges and learned how to solve them. Dr. Walsh and Ben Taylor worked with Queenara to share Earth's knowledge of atmospheric processing and environmental restoration. Carlos showed them advanced recycling techniques that could extend the life of their underground systems. The most important breakthrough came when Nina realized that the Xanthari had the scientific knowledge to save their world, but they lacked the industrial capacity to build the machines they needed. Their population was too small and their resources too limited. That night, as the human crew met in their guest quarters, Jake faced the hardest decision of his life. The Xanthari could be saved, but not on their homeworld. The damage was too severe and would take centuries to repair. But there was another option. The moon, Carlos said, studying orbital data on his tablet. Their largest moon has an atmosphere we could modify. It's smaller than their homeworld, but it could support their entire remaining population. You're talking about evacuating an entire species, Ben said. Moving 1 million people to another world. It's better than watching them all die, Amy pointed out. Jake looked around at his crew. These people who had given 30 years of their lives to help complete strangers. They had traveled farther from home than any humans in history, and now they were proposing something even more ambitious. We'll need to discuss this with Veltarn and the other leaders, Jake said finally. This has to be their choice. The next morning, Jake stood before the assembled Xanthari leaders and made humanity's offer. Through Nina's careful translation, he explained that while their homeworld might be beyond saving, their people and their culture could survive on their moon. The humans would help them build the ships and establish the colony. The chamber fell silent as the Xanthari leaders absorbed this incredible offer. Finally, Veltarn spoke. You would help us abandon our homeworld? The planet where our species was born? We would help you survive, Jake replied. Your world gave you life, but that life doesn't have to end here. You can carry your culture and your knowledge to a new world and build something even better. Queenara was the first to speak in favor of the plan. Our ancestors would want us to live. They would want our knowledge and our stories to continue. But not all the Xanthari agreed. Some felt they should stay and fight for their homeworld, even if it meant extinction. Others worried about trusting aliens they had just met. The debates continued for days while Jake and his crew waited nervously for a decision. Finally, Veltarn called for a vote. 6 months after first contact, the Xanthari moon looked completely different. What had once been a cold, airless rock was now bustling with construction activity. Human and Xanthari engineers worked side by side, building atmospheric processors, habitation domes, and the infrastructure needed to support nearly 1 million refugees. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the Pioneer, which now orbited the moon instead of wandering between stars. Through the windows, he could see the lights of New Xanthari, the first city being built on the moon's surface. The sight filled him with pride and amazement. The evacuation was going better than anyone had dared to hope. Working together, humans and Xanthari had designed ships that could carry thousands of people at a time from the dying homeworld to their new home. The Xanthari had contributed their advanced materials technology, while humans provided knowledge. It's about life support systems and large-scale construction. Dr. Nina Walsh spent most of her time on the moon's surface, working with Queenara and other Xanthari scientists. The collaboration between the two species was producing incredible breakthroughs. Xanthari biotechnology combined with human engineering was creating solutions neither species could have developed alone. Look at this, Nina said to Jake during one of his visits to the surface. She led him to a laboratory where Xanthari and human scientists were working on atmospheric processors. The Xanthari understand how to create self-repairing biological systems. Combined with our knowledge of industrial manufacturing, we can build machines that maintain themselves for centuries. The atmospheric processors were just the beginning. Carlos Rivera had been working with Xanthari engineers to improve spacecraft design. The aliens had developed materials that were stronger and lighter than anything humans had ever seen. When combined with human fusion technology, the result was ships that could travel between star systems in years instead of decades. We're not just saving the Xanthari, Carlos explained to Jake as they watched a new ship being assembled in orbit. They're teaching us things that will transform human space travel. With this technology, we could reach other star systems and explore the galaxy. Dr. Ben Taylor had perhaps the most fascinating job of all. He was working with Xanthari medical specialists to understand how their biology worked. The aliens had evolved on a world with different gravity and atmosphere, so their bodies worked differently than human bodies. But by studying each other, both species were learning new ways to treat diseases and injuries. They have an amazing ability to regenerate damaged tissue, Ben told Jake during one of their medical briefings. And we have knowledge about surgical techniques they never developed. By sharing our knowledge, we're both becoming better at healing. Amy Johnson had the most important job in some ways. She was managing communications between the evacuation effort, Earth, and the growing number of signals from other star systems. As news of the successful first contact spread through space, now the alien civilizations were beginning to send their own messages to the Xanthari system. It's like we started something, Amy told Jake, as she showed him the latest signal detections. Species that have been quiet for centuries are suddenly broadcasting. I think they've been waiting to see if anyone would actually travel between stars to help someone else. The evacuation took 2 years to complete. Ship after ship carried Xanthari families from their poisoned homeworld to the clean air and growing cities of their moon. Each refugee brought their own skills and knowledge, adding to the growing partnership between the two species. But the project wasn't without problems. Some Xanthari had trouble adapting to their new home. The moon's lower gravity was different from their homeworld, and many felt sad about leaving the planet, where their ancestors had lived for thousands of years. Some humans on Earth were also unhappy about the mission. Politicians complained about the cost and resources being spent on aliens instead of human problems. A few groups argued that humanity was sharing too much technology with creatures they still didn't fully understand. Jake dealt with these problems by focusing on results. The partnership with the Xanthari was already producing benefits for both species. New medical treatments, advanced materials, improved spacecraft designs, and cleaner energy systems were all coming out of the collaboration. More importantly, the two species were learning to trust each other. Xanthari children played with human children in the mixed neighborhoods of New Xanthari. Scientists from both species worked together so naturally that language barriers became minor inconveniences. Cultural exchanges led to new forms of art, music, literature that neither species could have created alone. 3 years after the evacuation was complete, Beltarn called a special ceremony to celebrate the partnership between humans and humans and humans. Xanthari. Representatives from both species gathered in the central plaza of New Xanthari, under a dome that showed the stars shining in the clear space above. 3 years ago, we were a dying people calling out desperately into the darkness, Beltarn said through the translation devices both species now used routinely. Today, we are part of something larger. We are part of a galactic community that cares about life and helps those in need. Jake spoke for humanity, his words translated into musical Xanthari tones that carried emotion as well as meaning. Came here to answer a call for help. We learned that helping others helps ourselves too. By working together, we've both become stronger than we ever were alone. The ceremony was broadcast across space to the other civilizations that were now sending messages to the Xanthari system. The galaxy was watching to see what happened when two species truly cooperated instead of competing. During the celebration, Amy approached Jake with exciting news. I've been analyzing the new signals we're receiving. There are at least 12 other civilizations within 100 light-years that are trying to make contact. Some of them have been broadcasting for even longer than the Xanthari. What are they saying? Jake asked. Most of them are asking for help with their own problems. Resource shortages, environmental disasters, disease outbreaks. But some are offering to share knowledge or provide assistance to others. Jake realized they were seeing the birth of something unprecedented, a galactic community based on cooperation. Instead of conquest, the success of the human-Xanthari partnership was proving that different species could work together for mutual benefit. 5 years after the evacuation, the partnership had grown into something neither species had imagined. New Xanthari was now one of the most advanced cities in the galaxy, with technology that combined the best of both civilizations. The city's atmospheric processors had been so successful that they were beginning to slowly repair the atmosphere of the Zenthari homeworld as well. More importantly, ships carrying mixed crews of humans and Zenthari were now visiting other star systems. Some went to answer distress calls from civilizations in trouble. Others carried trade goods and scientific knowledge to species that wanted to join the growing galactic community. Jake had chosen to stay in the Zenthari system rather than return to Earth. At 64 years old, he felt more at home among the stars than he would have felt back on the planet of his birth. He had become an ambassador and explorer, helping to establish peaceful contact with new species throughout the galaxy. Nina had made the same choice. She now led a research institute that studied alien biology and culture, preparing humanity for contact with dozens of different species. Her work was helping both humans and Zenthari understand how to communicate and cooperate with civilizations that were completely different from their own. Carlos was designing the ships that carried exploration teams to new worlds. Ben was developing medical protocols for treating diseases that affected multiple species. Amy was managing a communication network that connected civilizations across hundreds of light years. 10 years after first contact, Amy sent a message back to Earth that would take 8 years to arrive. In it, she described how the partnership with the Zenthari had led to contact with 17 other civilizations. Trade routes now connected dozens of star systems. Scientific knowledge was being shared across the galaxy. And most importantly, when civilizations called for help, someone always answered. The message ended with words that would become famous throughout human space. We answered one call for help, and it changed everything. The galaxy is full of people waiting to be part of something bigger than themselves. All they need is someone willing to reach out and help. Back on Earth, new signals arrived every day from civilizations that had heard about humanity's willingness to travel across space to help strangers. Each signal was a request for help, an offer of friendship, or an invitation to join the growing galactic community. And thanks to the partnership with the Zenthari, humanity now had the technology and the wisdom to answer every single call. The age of galactic civilization had begun, started by a simple human principle. When someone needs help, you answer the call.